All right. Well, welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, which is on healthy soils and edible landscaping. So whenever we talk about our classes, we always want to look at them in a very holistic fashion. And so we have this honeycomb here as a way to remind us that, yes, we're going to be focusing on different topics, but that everything is connected, everything is tied together. So as we make our way through tonight's class, the 6 pieces of the honeycomb are: one, we are going to start with building the soil sponge. It is fundamental to a healthy landscape. Number two is talking about compost. So giving you some tips on how to create good compost and the role that it plays in building that soil sponge. Number three, something you may or may not have heard about, which is sheet composting. So we'll explain that. Number four, an important conversation about water. So as we know, gardens do not survive without proper watering. So what does that look like? Number five, coming around to food. So growing flavorful, nutritious food. And then number six, designing an edible landscape. So moving away from the idea that edible fruits, vegetables need to be set in rows or planter beds or what have you, that there is actually quite a bit of variety and opportunity to explore what that could look like. So that is what we have lined up for tonight. Let's get going. All right, so we are going to begin with building the soil sponge. All of our classes revolve around this philosophy of the watershed-wise approach to landscaping. And it doesn't matter what we are growing. It is a model for how we want to look at our landscapes. So the idea is that we get precipitation, it makes its way down to the ground, it's intercepted by plants, which slows that rain down. As it makes its way to the ground, it's going to flow over land to a body of water, or it may actually infiltrate into the soil. And there it is cleaned and filtered by the biology in the soil and by the plant roots. And then from there, some of that water will move sideways, making its way into the river. And some of the water might continue percolating on down. And that is how we replenish our aquifers. Then the sun comes up and that water evaporates or evapotranspires, and we start the process all over again. And so what we want you to do is to use this watershed approach for your garden. So your front yard, your backyard, your side yard, really anywhere there's a little plot of land, it is indeed a mini watershed. And the 4 key principles, we start with that healthy living soil sponge. We want to make sure that we have climate appropriate plants, natives, absolutely, but it doesn't have to be exclusively so. The importance of capturing rainwater and keeping that precious resource on the landscape. And then finally, if we are looking at irrigation, using irrigation, make sure that it is as efficient as possible and that it is looked at as a supplemental resource rather than just assuming it is there as the default. So we will be talking about all of these principles as we dive into tonight's topic. So we talked about climate appropriate plants, and it doesn't matter what you're planting. You could be planting roses, you could be planting edibles, you could be planting palm trees, you could be planting turf. It is all growing from the ground up. And so that is where we have to start with our focus. What do we need to know about the ground, the soil there? So one of the questions that you will want to answer for yourself, and there's actually a workbook that'll be coming to you a little bit later in the week that takes you through these steps in more detail. So the question you're going to ask yourself is, well, what kind of soil do I have? And, we know about sand, silt, clay, and actually most soils are some sort of combination of the 3 of those. And in the workbook, there's a couple of different ways that you will be able to determine what kind of soil you have. And I'm going to explain in just a little bit why it's important to know that. So the 3 common types, the way, big chunks divided it up, is you've got sand. Sand are large particles, water goes in very easily, and it drains out very, very quickly. Silt is pretty much in the middle. You've got medium-sized particles, the water goes in moderately quickly, and then it drains out moderately. And then you have clay, which is sort of the other extreme from the sand. And there you've got tiny particles with small gaps in between them. And that means it takes a while for the soil to absorb the water that's being applied to it. It sits there in the soil for much longer, and it takes longer for that soil to dry out. And you may be going, well, goodness, which of these soils is the best? And do I have it? And the reality is actually all of them are the best. There's nothing wrong with any of these types of soils. And the important thing to be aware of is that they can all be improved. So if you live in any sort of area that has been developed, your soil, especially if there's turf on top of it, or there's been construction or what have you, it is compacted, it is probably depleted. And so there are many, many things that we can do to improve the health of the soil. And that's what we'll be talking about in more detail. So I remember when I learned this a while ago, and that was that it's actually the plants that are in control of their environment. It kind of blows your mind. And they work in relationship with the microbes that are in the soil. So I had talked about the biology a little bit earlier. And so through photosynthesis, it is taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, pulls it into its tissue, and then sends that carbon down into the soil. And there, that carbon is transformed into different strings of carbohydrates, and those carbohydrates begin to be used as a way to exchange with the biology for the particular nutrients that that plant may need. So it could be things like it needs nitrogen or calcium or copper or phosphorus or what have you. But there is an exchange. It's almost like a barter system that happens between the plant and the biology for what that plant requires. And so we keep talking about the sponge and the healthy living soil sponge, and I'm going to explain how we actually create that sponge. But basically, underground, there is a huge, huge sponge that gets created that's some 5 to 6 times larger, including the roots, than the plant in the soil. So this is a significant mass that gets developed in healthy soil. And so we actually said there's a soil party going on. And in a teaspoon of soil, you've got billions of microbes, all different kinds. New ones are being discovered all the time. And the microbes are responsible for improving the structure of the soil and for creating the nutrients that are making those nutrients available for the plants to utilize for their development. So all of these are in the landscape to greater or lesser extents. In most cases, a lot of them are dormant, or we just don't have the population that we need to really get that soil party going. We start out with the bacteria, and there's bacteria everywhere, right? Bacteria in the air, bacteria in our bodies, bacteria in the soil. And bacteria eats everything. It eats organic and inorganic material. It is unable to provide waste or release waste. And so what it does instead is it divides. So it eat and divide, eat and divide, eat and divide. And then you've got the protozoa, which are a little bit larger than the bacteria. They eat the bacteria. You can see they've got these little flagella, like these little legs there, which allows them to move through the soil. And it just takes a film of water in order for them to be able to migrate. And they, unlike the bacteria, are indeed able to release their waste into the soil. Next up at the soil party are our nematodes. They're the ones that look like the little worms there, but they are microscopic. They eat the protozoa, they eat the bacteria, they eat each other. And because of their shape and how they are starting to tunnel through the soil, actually the protozoa as well, but these are a little bit larger, they are starting to improve the porousness of the soil. And when they release their waste, it is available for the first time to the plants. And then we ask the question, well, then who shows up next? We've got bacteria, we got protozoa, we've got nematodes. The weeds show up next. And weeds will show up in soils that are disturbed or depleted. And the reason that they show up is they are critical to building the health of the soil because of their lifespan. So they live and die, live and die, live and die. And over time, over decades, they will eventually provide the food for the biology so that that soil can be improved. But many people don't really want weeds in their gardens, and they certainly don't want to be waiting decades in order to improve the soil. And so the question becomes, well, how do we replace the role that weeds play? How do we replace what feeds the soil party with food? And no, it's not pizza, it is organic matter. So when we add organic matter in the form of compost or humates or worm castings, that is when the party starts jumping. That is when the fungal network shows up. And the fungal network is literally a network, and they are moving back and forth nutrients, they are moving back and forth water. That's how plants communicate with each other. And then the fungi are also really, really important to breaking things down, to decomposing the materials. And so when you have all of this and things are really, really starting to happen, that's when that party, as we say, is rocking. That's when you start to see the earthworms and the other pill bugs and other creatures. And you will find that your plants are going to get healthier and the soil will be more easily able to hold on to water when it receives it and then make that water available to the plants as they need it. So most of us are familiar with the road that compost plays, decomposition plays in building the health of the soil and feeding the microbes. But there's actually another path, and that is something called liquid carbon. And so let me take you through how that works. So we talked about how the carbon makes its way down through the trunk, into the roots, and then on um, out into the soil to be communicating with that biology. And the form that it does that are known as exudates. And so this carbon, these exudates that are making their way out into the soil are like an incentive. They activate the biology in the soil in order to get them to do what is needed to provide the food for the plants so that they can go ahead and continue to thrive. And so where is this biology, this soil party that I keep talking about? So it's right at where the root tips are. And you've got, again, this is a microscope and look at the roots and you can see that there is, it's hard to determine, but you can see that there is all this activity, all of this life around it. And it's not as though, there's just 5 or 6 types of biology, but there are millions, billions, new ones being discovered all the time. And each plant, each type of plant, each family of plant has its own family of microbes, if you will. So you've got the biology that, hangs out with lavender, and the biology that hangs out with a tomato plant, the biology that hangs out with potatoes. And so the more different types of plants that we can have, the more biology we invite into the soil, the more biology we have, the quicker the soil starts to improve. And so you've got these roots, and then you've got the fungi that connect to the roots. And what it does basically is you've got the roots that go out, however many feet beyond the plant, and then the fungi will actually take the network and extend it way, way, way beyond the plant itself. And so we talk about how the fungi can actually communicate, the front yard to the backyard, how they can move water to where the plants are if it's not readily available. And so this is really an incredible thing to develop, to be aware of, and to stimulate in the landscape. And so imagine now we've got these roots and we've got this fungi and we're able to go out way, way, way beyond the roots. Well, imagine if you had roots that were actually significantly longer. This is what is actually possible for roots. We are limited in our thinking about how deep our roots go. People say, oh, I've got a Bermuda grass, for example, and it goes down 18 inches. What am I going to do? This is an image actually of prairie grasses, and some of those actually go down some 13 feet. Trees go even deeper. So you can see that if you can get this activity going, how much this would benefit the health of the soil, and with that, obviously, the benefit of your plants. Now, we've talked about healthy soil and porousness and nutrients. Well, something else that we want to look at is the actual structure of the plant, because it's the structure that allows it to function as a sponge. So we have this image here, and we have two different samples of soil. One sample is taken from an area that is native soil. It hasn't been disturbed. The other one has been taken from an area that is in a garden. So, it has been worked. And the assumption is, or rather the question would be, which of these, either the clear or the muddy, is the native soil? And it's actually the water that is clear. Because when you have soil that has not been disturbed and the soil party is active and the fungi are there and everybody is doing their job, the structure of the soil is much firmer. It doesn't erode as quickly. It keeps its shape. So this is really important to know if one of the concerns you have is, soil loss and erosion, and what do we do to make sure that our soils stay in place. So here we go. Let's go ahead and take a look at soil structure. You can see almost that it looks like a sponge, right? You've got like these little pockets in there. You can see the roots that have gone through it. And it is basically formed by small particles coming together with this glue, for lack of a better term, called glomalin. So you get small particles, and then bacteria adds its slime, and so now you've got these larger particles, and then just bit by bit, you start to improve the quality, the sponginess, these micro and macro aggregates that allow the soil to function as that sponge that we keep talking about. And this is how we hold on to more water. So depending on where you live, and it's actually not a resource to be wasted anywhere, we want to make sure that whatever water is ending up in a garden stays in the garden, whether it's rain or it's irrigation. And the greater that soil aggregation is, the more of it we have, the more the soil functions as a sponge, the more water it's able to hold on to. And they've actually shown that this improved aggregation means that we can hold on to 26 to 34% more water. So imagine that when you apply, 10, 15, 20 gallons, that you are able to have the soil hold on to 24 to 36 more, or 26 to 34% more of it than it would have been able to otherwise. And so we talked about, feeding the soil with the organic matter. And there's two ways that we're going to do that. We're going to do that with compost, and we're going to do that with mulch. So compost basically looks like soil. It smells like soil, it smells delicious. And we say it looks like dark chocolate, and it has the texture of moist cake. Yes, we at G3 like our food. But basically what it is it is material that has completely broken down. You can't see what it is. And it is used primarily as a soil amendment. So we can mix it into the soil. Sometimes we put it on top. Mulch, on the other hand, is not decomposed. It stays on top of the soil, and you can see what it is. And it's really important as far as keeping the soil moist, keeping it cool, and as it breaks down, it will also feed that biology. And so a wonderful way to make that garden more resilient based on what we've been talking about is to add diversity, to add layers. And so in this case, we've got an ornamental garden, and you can do the exact same thing with edible landscapes. So the idea that you have trees and you've got shrubs and you've got ground cover and you've got annuals and you've got perennials, and all of those are sending their roots into the ground and then just maximizing the amount of biology that is thriving in that environment. So that was the sponge, making sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to what it is that we need to invest in, pay attention to. Let's talk about compost. Um, so there's two different things as we talked about. There's compost and there's mulch. You will need way more mulch than you do compost. And it's good to know sort of like how much you're going to need, because there's the assumption, certainly with mulch, that you just need to sprinkle out a little bit. But no, we need to bring it in a certain quantity. So compost, you're bringing in maybe 1/4 of an inch to an inch thick. You don't have to blend it in, though you can. And then mulch, we're bringing in 3 to 4 inches. So it is a significant amount of mulch that we are going to be applying. Now, if it's just a little space, you've got just a little planter, you can buy a couple of bags and you're good. If it's a larger space, you need to look at bringing it in mulch. Excuse me, you need to bring it in bulk. And, you can certainly buy it, but tonight's class is also how you can make it. How do you make your own compost? Now, too often when we think about making compost, all we're thinking about are kitchen scraps. And it's like, oh, let me go do something with my kitchen scraps. I'll turn it into compost. But in order to have compost that is successful, that actually feeds the soil the way we want it to, we require a balance. So we require a balance of brown, which is carbon material, with green, which has the nitrogen. And then on top of that, there needs to be oxygen and a certain amount of water. So what do I need by browns? The carbon. So I'm talking about leaves, I'm talking about sawdust. You can actually shred, your tax papers and put them into the compost bin. But what's important to notice is that it's 50 to 70%. We actually want more browns in there than we want greens. The greens are easy. We have a lot of it. The greens bring in the nitrogen, of course. You can put in grass clippings. You can bring in coffee grinds. Obviously, the kitchen waste. You can bring in seaweed, actually, when it rinse off the salt. But all of that can be considered the greens that you would add to your compost. And then we talked about how every now and then you're going to want to toss it, and you're going to need to add some water. Like, we don't want it to get dried out, or basically the biology that we've been trying to stimulate goes to sleep. So that biology works in the soil, works in the compost bin. We want that active. So if you are interested in building your own compost bin, and again, tonight's class is recorded, so you can come back, take a look at this. We recommend that you put it on the ground. That's probably the best way, so that there is actually a relationship between the native soil that you've got and what you are building on top of it. The idea that your native soil kind of inoculates the compost bin. It says, here are the guys, the microbes that are already in your soil. Let's get them into the compost bin as well. And then we're going to start layering. So we start with the browns, then we add the greens, then we add some more browns and some more greens, etc. And then ideally, you're going to go ahead and cover it so that it doesn't dry out, so that we keep the moisture in there and so that we can start to build up some heat. And then every now and then, depending on how actively you are maintaining your compost, you will want to turn it. Stir it with one of those big forks, or turn it. Some people actually have several piles and they move it from one to the other. And one of the reasons, again, is to just keep things hot, keep things breaking down, and to keep away from something called anaerobic life, which is the life that can potentially be a source of pathogens. So we just want to stir it so that that compost breaks down more quickly. Now, it's also possible to do something called cold composting. This is the lazy man, lazy woman's form of composting, which is that you just keep piling it on top. It definitely will take a lot longer for it to break down, but doesn't take nearly as long. And things you do want to watch out for is you don't want to put weeds in there. You don't want to put any plant that's been diseased or has pests in it, because this form of composting just doesn't get hot enough to kill them. If you are interested in doing what we call active management, thermophilic management, that is where you are actively working your compost pile to get it to that sort of sweet spot when it comes to the temperature, which is about 141 to 155 degrees. It is much faster, the rate of composting. Some of the things that will require is it's basically 2 to 1 when it comes to carbon versus nitrogen. So browns versus greens. You do want to have a minimum amount of space allotted for that. Minimum is like 3 by 3 by 3. You are keeping an eye on the moisture. So it should feel again like a sponge that's been wrung out. It's not sopping wet, but it's not dry. And you are managing it by turning it perhaps more frequently, by adding water, by taking a look at the ratio of the browns to the greens. And then as it starts to cool down, as it finishes, you can obviously then take it out and spread it around the garden. Now, if your compost is doing what it should be doing, then it shouldn't smell bad. It usually starts to smell bad when there is more green than brown. So that's usually the first thing you can do is like add dead leaves, add that shredded paper, add sawdust, and then toss it. And that usually takes care of it pretty quickly. The other thing we wanted to mention as far as compost is people will say, well, can I add manure to it? Chicken or horse, they live by a ranch or what have you. And the thing about manure is you don't want to be adding it directly into the garden. You want to make sure that it breaks down completely. So we say if you're going to use manure, add it to your compost pile first, let it break down that way, and then you can go ahead and spread it out into the garden. So things to be aware of is know what the source is of the manure, where is that coming from? Make sure that however those animals are being cared for, that nobody's using dewormers or growth hormones. Basically, anything that you put into the garden is feeding the biology. And so you want to make sure that we are putting good things into the garden. And it will smell if it's not fully composted. So make sure that you've got like good smelling compost before it goes out to the garden. All right, so people will say, well, what if I have clay soil? What do I do if I have clay soil? You add compost. And well, what if I have sandy soil? You add compost. And actually plants as well. Plants are especially helpful when you've got a sandy soil as far as just increasing that soil structure so we can hold on to that water more effectively. And the thing about compost or worm castings, unlike fertilizers, is you can't overdo them, right? You don't have to worry about just the perfect balance of phosphorus and nitrogen and what have you. You just put out the compost, you put out the worm castings, and they feed the soil The biology will take care of the plant. So they feed the biology in the soil, and then the biology takes care of the plants. Okay, moving on, sheet composting. So sheet composting is also known as the lasagna method, or layering. The idea is that we lay down paper and compost and mulch and water, and that is another way of improving the quality of the soil, as well as managing weed and grass regrowth. So you're going to go ahead and do this methodically. The first thing that goes down are the compost or the humates. You sprinkle that down 1/4 to an inch. You can do more, up to an inch, and then you're going to water everything really, really well. After that, you're going to put down paper. We find the brown paper, say 3 feet wide, to be the easiest to work with. You can use newspaper, you can use cardboard, but this is inexpensive, easy to work with. So for us, it's been the most successful. And then you're going to overlap it by 6 inches, because part of what we're trying to do is block the sun from making its way to the soil and potentially stimulating new growth. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and add the compost and the mulch. Now, we said 3 to 4 inches of mulch, but you don't want to put that down all at the same time, because it will never get wet, and that mulch needs to be wet in order to start that breakdown process. So you put down 1 to 2 inches, water it thoroughly, and then you put down another 1 to 2 inches and water it thoroughly. So you will be using a lot of water in order to jumpstart this process. But that's how it happens. As this stuff starts to break down, we are really improving the quality of the soil. Plus, we are keeping weeds from growing up. We're making the soil more porous, more sponge-like. And then skip the weed fabric. We say the weed fabric really grows weeds. It doesn't break down. It actually creates a barrier between the food for the biology and the biology that is in the soil. So make life easier, just use that brown paper. Next up is watering. It isn't just about adding water to the garden. It is about finding that balance of oxygen and water in the soil. Now, we know what happens if we don't water enough, right? There's a lot of oxygen and your plant will get kind of droopy. But it's also possible to overwater. And when we do that, we create these conditions for anaerobic life because we don't have enough oxygen in the soil. And with that anaerobic life comes the pathogens and the disease. So again, we are looking for that balance, that sweet spot where we have just enough oxygen and just enough water. Now, remember how we started at the beginning with what type of soil do you have? Is it sandy, clay, or something in between? And one of the reasons that you want to know that is because it affects how the water moves through the soil, which will affect how frequently and for how long you water your plants, right? So sandy, with their big particles, water goes in quickly, drains through quickly. As a result, the profile tends to be relatively narrow and it goes deep pretty quickly. At the other end, with clay soil and our small particles and how that water takes much longer to make its way into the soil, that means that it doesn't go down as deep nearly as quickly. And instead, what it's doing is it's kind of spreading out. And so you've got almost like a bowl that happens when we are watering our plants. So how can you water? You can absolutely hand water with the hose or with the watering can. It's a wonderful thing to do, early in the morning or in the evening after you've had a long day at work, to just be out there in the garden watering. There's actually this other thing called an Oya, and they are made out of terracotta. And the reason that they are terracotta is because the water will actually seep through. So you fill them with water and then they eventually make their way out into the soil. So, maybe once or twice a week you're refilling them, but it means that you don't have to be out there every day watering, right? That can actually make its way into the soil and then the plants can take it up. And then if you are wanting to, you can also install a drip system. So we recommend doing inline drip, which means that the emitters are already built in every 12, 18, 24 inches. And you're going to go ahead and lay them out every 12 or 18 or 20, probably 12 to 18 inches, probably not much more than that, in a grid. And the idea is that we want to have the water going into the soil and that it completely waters the area that we are planting. So you can see that where the little circles are is where the emitters are. And the other thing you'll want to notice is that the emitters are actually offset. So it creates like a triangle. And what this does is it means that the entire area is watered in a cohesive fashion. And, we don't have stripes or areas of the landscape that is not being watered. So here are some of the different components that you would see in a drip system. You've got a zone shutoff valve. So that allows you to turn the water or to regulate the water going into a planter, for example. Maybe you have 5 different beds and, a couple of them are not going to be used for a while. So you can actually shut those areas off so that they're not being watered while nothing is growing. You've also got a flush valve. When you've got a drip system, there will be some sediment that can get built up in there, and that allows you to open it up and that water with a little, grit in it to get washed out so that you don't clog it. So here is a sample. Again, this system, these grid installations can work on the ground. They can also work in a raised bed. So you can see you've got that tubing. You can see the shutoff valve at the bottom of the raised bed. So again, if you had 5 beds, you could go ahead and turn this one off if nothing was growing. And then at the far end of it, you've got that flush valve so that you can just clean everything else out if you need to. So as we start to focus more on our edibles, one of the things that you'll want to be aware of is how much water do different edibles require? And they don't all require the same amount. So typically what you'll find is an annual, which is a short-lived plant, maybe every 6 months to a year. You grow it once, you harvest it, and then it's done, compared to a perennial, which will come back year after year. And we found for the most part that our annuals are going to require more water than our perennials. So you can see there's letters on our colored circles. They stand for high, H for high, M is for medium water user, L is for low water user, and VL is for very low water using. So we have a chart here of different kinds of edibles. These are summer annuals, and they are, as you can see, for the most part, you've got those blue circles there. For the most part, they're medium water users. And we've got, cucumbers are high water users, and then we've got some of the low water users with our eggplants and believe it or not, our cherry tomatoes. Tomatoes don't actually require a lot of water. And then a similar thing with our winter annuals, our cool season edibles. And so those are going to be your root vegetables, a lot of your greens, your spinaches, etc. And here you can see, interestingly enough, other than the cilantro, almost everything is medium. And then our garlic is a low water user. And then it also applies to larger plants. So you've got trees. And the thing that's interesting about fruit trees is if you have enough room, you can actually have fruit all year round. And obviously, depending on where you live, so you can have pomegranates as you move into fall and winter. Figs are there made in November, elderberry in the heat of summer. The same thing applies to our perennial shrubs and herbs. Herbs, for the most part, you're going to have all year round. It's not like they're going to go, there's no fruit to pick, no berries to pick. Whereas an artichoke or a sorrel, there will be times of the year where they are going to be more, you're actually looking to harvest them. And then you've got vines. So you've got grapes and you've got kiwi. So the idea, there's actually a native grape, or in California, there's a native grape. Passion fruit. I'm going to show you some images in a little bit of how the vines can be grown as part of the landscaping, on trellises and on arbors to create shade as well as a source of fruit. Now, up to this point, we've been talking about water as depending on our potable water system, so water that you're getting from a water provider. But it's really important to be aware of, how do we get other sources of water? How do we tap into other sources of water so that we're not so dependent on water that needs to be cleaned and delivered and what have you? So free water, basically. So a huge thing to consider is taking advantage of rainwater. In this case, you've got, there's a path there. It actually captures the water and then channels it to the vegetable garden that is at the end of the mulched path. And that water has been captured from across the street there, excuse me, across the sidewalk. There's a series of apartments. They've captured the water off the rain, taken it underground, and then it is being held in that path, and then that is how that vegetable garden, to a certain extent, is being watered. Now, something else which you may or may not be aware of is something called hugelkultur. And this is a great thing to be aware of if you've got any green waste, so if you've had to cut a tree down or there's been a big storm and you've got some limbs, the idea that you don't have to take it off to the dump. And in this image, what they actually did is they took some of that material and they put it in a swale. So the swale is the basin that holds onto the rainwater. And then you're adding compost and you're adding mulch and you're adding native soil, and you can plant it. And in this case, we've got a series of natives here, but it is a great way of planting edibles. And then the last one I'm going to talk about, and we actually have a workshop on gray water that you can check out, which is the idea of using water that has been reclaimed from your house. So there's different methods. Some are more simple than others, but the idea is that you can take water that was used inside the house and then use it outside the house. Now, the thing is, not all plants like gray water. Gray water has, they can be high in salts, and there's some plants that really don't do well with that, as well as how gray water needs to be delivered. So, if you're growing blueberries or avocado, not such a great idea. Not great for root vegetables, because again, think about where gray water is coming from, right? It is not fresh, potable water. So you don't want that going directly on your root vegetables. And it's not appropriate for leafy greens. So really where it's best is for, it's great for like fruit trees. It's actually great for fruit trees, as well as some other plants. But these are some of the ones where if you're growing them and you want to do gray water, you may want to look into that a little bit more carefully. All right, we are wrapping around to growing flavorful, nutritious food. So we have seen over the past 70 years a huge depletion in the nutrition of our food. Like, we know the flavor's gone down, but on top of that, so have the nutritional values. You can see this chart here, things like potassium, calcium, oh my goodness, has dropped significantly. Zinc, so big hits that we've been taken to, it takes, 2 and 3 times as much spinach to get the same amount of iron as it did 70 years ago. And so there are these regenerative principles. You may have heard of them if you're at all following regenerative agriculture. We're going to focus on just a few of these in this webinar. They'll all be available to you in the workbook so that you can learn more about them. The ones we're going to focus on are minimal disturbance, covering the mother, keeping living roots in soil, and how important diversity is. So we've been talking about these in different ways. We're going to go ahead and now take that conversation and apply it specifically to growing our edibles. So the first one is that minimal disturbance. We talked about the soil party and getting it going. And so the last thing that you want to do after you've worked so hard to get that and all that good structure that you've been creating is to go in there and break it all apart. Now, sometimes what'll happen, if you've taken your turf out, is that that soil is compacted. There isn't much oxygen in there. And so, we need to do something to just break it up a little bit. But what we don't want to be doing is double digging. You don't want to be cultivating. You don't want to be tilling. So the idea is that you're going to do it one time. If you are going to cultivate, you do it one time. You add your compost and then you leave it alone. Even after you've done, planted your vegetables and they're done for the season, you don't have to pull them out. You can just cut the greens off and then let it break down below the surface. The idea that there is no bare soil. If you go out anywhere into nature, you will see there is no bare soil. There's always something growing or covering. So this example, we've been talking about mulch. This is straw, but the idea that you can use cover crops or ground covers to accomplish the same thing. We say it's a living mulch. And what is great about this is we are now adding those roots. So remembering how important it was to get more roots, which increases the diversity of the biology, which accelerates the building that soil sponge. And then all three of these cover crops here are actually nitrogen fixers. And so the idea that they pull nitrogen from the atmosphere and then go ahead and send it into the soil. Something that is super helpful when you are planting your edibles is to add local natives. And so you get the benefit of the roots, but you also get the benefit of inviting in the pollinators and the beneficial insects to help keep your garden in balance. So you don't need to bring in herbicides. You don't need to bring in pesticides. That this helps create a natural balance in your landscape. Here we go, praying mantis, great natural predator. And remembering that everything has a purpose. So even though you're going, oh no, worms or caterpillars or aphids, the idea is that there is a cycle and everything eats something else. So being a little bit tolerant of, if there's a little bit of damage or what have you, that there is a natural ally out there to help keep things in balance for you. All right, now comes the juiciest part of this presentation, and that is actually designing a landscape that is edible. So as we said at the beginning, this is typically how we think about an edible garden or an edible landscape is you've got these planters and your, vegetables and fruits are neat and tidy in these rows where they're easy to harvest. The thing that's really interesting and good to know is that growing vegetables in the ground is the best. Yes, you can put them in raised planters. Yes, you can put them in containers. You may need to. But growing in the ground is best because they actually need less water. And the water that is in the soil stays in there longer. And also, especially if you're working with perennials, the opportunity for those roots to go down as deep as they want. They're not limited by having a pot that says you can't go any deeper, or they make their way into the little hole and then eventually clog the exit for the water. So yes, this is what we're accustomed to. You can definitely get very, very formal and linear with your edibles. In this case, we've got, in this one bed, we have artichoke in the middle, and then there's rosemary and thyme around the perimeter there. You can get playful and have lots and lots of fun with how you lay it out, what you use for your containers. The idea of growing a food forest. So this is a combination, again, of having different levels of edibles. You've got trees, and you've got shrubs, and you've got ground covers, and you've got annuals. And then you've got all of these roots and all of this biology. And then the quite real possibility that you can actually incorporate them right into the landscape. So it doesn't have to be, oh, there's an apple tree and it stands there by itself, but rather that the apple tree will be much happier with companions. This one, it's almost like a Where's Waldo in that there are edibles mixed into this landscape. You can see it off to the far right. There is a massive kale that is growing in the landscape, and they've got some onions in there, and they've got a sage, which is actually edible as well. This is a front yard that is entirely composed of edibles. Now, given the types of plants that they are growing, it's possible at different times of the year there will be different plants that are growing in, but they have just given it up for the food. In this case, we have a hedge that is made out of rosemary. So the idea that we've got multiple functions here. Ground cover. So on the left, we've got thyme that is set in between pavers. Herbs are great for that. You can do oregano. There's others. Wild strawberry, if you live in a shadier area, is also a great option. So you're not actually stepping on things. You can step on the hardscape, but then you've got things growing around the edges or in the gaps. And then if you've got a lawn, and you're happy to let go of the lawn, the possibility that you could actually be growing chamomile out there. And there's lots of other plants that work similarly. Now, here's an interesting idea. Oftentimes, we're told to plant a deciduous tree on the south or west side of the home. And the reason for that is a deciduous tree will drop its leaves in the wintertime, and then obviously leaves out in the spring and summer, so that you get the shade during the summertime when you need it. And then once the leaves drop off, you have the bare branches that allow the sun to come through during the fall and winter. So this is actually a persimmon tree. And then the idea that you can use espaliers. So the thing with espaliers is they take a little bit of work. You need to make sure that whatever it is that they are connecting to is well anchored. These are citrus here. And then we've got another espalier in this case, and then this is actually apple. And so in some cases, you're going to need a more significant back. In others, they are actually pruning the branches to create the wall itself. So again, it takes a little bit of care and knowledge, but absolutely something that can be done. I love this picture because it reminds me of a maypole. And so it's almost an art project. There's a spiral in the middle, and then they've got all kinds of beans running up the strings, and then it's surrounded by vegetables in the background. The idea that your vines, your perennial vines, your edible vines can also function for shade or camouflage. And there are quite a few of them that will work. The most familiar one's going to be the grape. You can use kiwi. Passion fruit is great because it also attracts the butterflies. And then there are definitely some more exotic vines as well. And then look at how wonderful this is. It's almost like an art installation. So you've created this shady tunnel pass through with all of these beautiful gourds growing from it. And then that you can use edibles for hedges. So you don't need to use boxwood, and you don't need to use ficus. You can put in pomegranates, and then they can serve their purpose, to create an edge or a barrier, and then you can eat them when they are ripe. Same thing with a strawberry guava. It's actually a beautiful, beautiful plant. The fruit you can go ahead and eat, make jelly and jams out of. And then there is a strawberry tree. So you've got strawberry on the ground, and then you have the strawberry tree, and it is this soft, very subtle flavored fruit tree. And then in some cases, you will want to work with planters, or you're going to choose to work with planters. One of the big benefits is that they are raised, or you can build them so that they're raised so that you can go ahead and sit on them. Makes it a little bit easier to work. In some cases, you don't have a lot of space and you really want to focus on growing edible fruits and vegetables. And there are times when the soils really are beyond, in that, maybe there's a lot of heavy metals in there, maybe they're high in salts, and so plants are really struggling. The possibility or the consideration that you might actually want to bring in a raised planter. And then where can you put planters? Just about any place. So you can put them where there's nothing else. You can integrate them into the rest of the landscape. They are great if there is no soil, right? So you can put them on a balcony or a terrace or a patio. You can put them on a roof, but a little disclaimer that on a roof, you do need to be aware of weight, how heavy those things can get, and what happens to the water. Where is that water on the roof draining to? You want to make sure there's not a bunch of soil that's perhaps blocking things, downspouts, etc. Now, oftentimes in a planter or a container, people are adding potting soil. And so we wanted to say that potting soil isn't actually soil. There's no structure to it. It's been sterilized. They don't want things growing in there except the plants. But as we've just spent the past hour talking about, we want life in the soil. That's how the plants grow. Very little organic material unless you add it. It drains very, very quickly. And so you're needing to water more frequently. And the soil actually dries out so quickly sometimes that it will no longer absorb the water. So it just dries out and then the water is just running through. So just be aware that if you are bringing in potting soil, that you may want to do some things to make it a little bit more viable for what you're growing. Now, as far as planters, you don't have to build them with wool. These are actually built with CMU blocks. You can put them together. There's no concrete. They just stack them one on top of the other, filled it with either native soil or potting soil, and then planted right into them. This one is a little bit more complicated. It's beautiful. It was made with redwood. Again, an opportunity. It's a little narrow there, but to provide seating. They've got wild strawberries at the base. They've got these trellises in there so that they can run up their vines, and definitely looks like it has been planned. And then we're going to leave you with one exercise, or rather it'll be in the workbook with when you get it, and that is a sample plan. And in it, we're going to go ahead and give you some options for different kinds of edibles, so edible trees and different shrubs. And the idea is that you can take this and sort of mix and match what you would like to put in there. And it really is to inspire you to look at your landscape and sort of reconsider what's possible, that you don't necessarily have to grow your lettuce in a straight row, that you can tuck it in with other things, and certainly with trees and shrubs, your perennials. There's lots of opportunity for them to be part of the landscape and not just a source of food. So that takes us through all 6 of the honeycomb. And what you'll be getting once the recording is up is you'll be able to download a certificate of attendance. So you have a certificate that you can have for yourself. And coming soon will be the workbook that accompanies this, and it covers all the material that we have just talked about. It has some activities for you to look at so that you can go ahead and keep moving forward with actually creating your own edible landscape. And then want to learn more, visit watershedwise.com, which is where this recording will live. And we've got all kinds of other classes that are related to this. There's one that focuses more specifically on containers and planters, one that goes into working with herbs. Watershed Wise Landscaping speaks to that watershed approach in a lot more detail. And then Roses and Daffodils is really about pleasure and looking at a traditional garden and making it more watershed wise.